The Draconain commander's reptilian skull crunched sickeningly as Sergeant Jacob Jones smashed his armored fist into its face, splattering scaly flesh and toxic green blood across the alien jungle foliage. Jacob's Space Marine squad was outnumbered 20-1, deep in hostile territory, and failure meant the human race's annihilation. They had mere hours to infiltrate a top-secret Sakari research base, extract critical intel on a planet-killing superweapon, and get out alive. Avoiding the patrols had been easy. Indigenous creatures like the acid-spitting death worms were child's play compared to the hellish alien monsters they faced in the Giles campaign. No, the real threat was Commander Draco himself. The 8-foot genetically engineered lizard had a personal grudge against humanity. Rumors claimed Jacob's unit slaughtered Draco's hatchlings in a Black Ops raid a decade ago. True or not, Draco fought with a savagery unmatched, and was as cunning as he was bloodthirsty. And now his Sakari elite guard had Jacob's squad pinned down and surrounded, plasma bolts flash-boiling the jungle into an inferno around them. Marines screamed as gouts of star-hot plasma reduced them to charred skeletons in an instant. They were fish in a barrel. This draconian empire is about to learn why they call us humans space orcs. Jacob snarled through gritted teeth, reloading his pulse rifle. We'll burn this place to cinders and make Draco choke on his own blood. He gestured to his surviving men in quick hand signs. They had to break out now, complete the mission, or die trying. Humanity's hope hung by a thread, and that thread was Jacob and his space marines. They were the only ones standing between the human race and extinction. Jacob and Draco crashed through the jungle vegetation, tumbling down a steep rocky ravine. Sharp stones and branches cut into their flesh as they rolled, but neither would relinquish their hold on the other. At the bottom, battered and bleeding, they rose to face each other again. But something caught Jacob's eye, half buried in the soil. The hull of a spacecraft, ancient and alien. He paused, and Draco followed his gaze. An unspoken truce passed between them. The ship could hold secrets, technology, a way off this rock. Survival came before vengeance. For now. Draco ripped open the rusted airlock doors with his bare claws. They stepped inside the musty, echoing hold, rifles raised. Lights flickered to life, illuminating strange hieroglyphs on the walls. A sudden sound. Jacob tackled Draco as a hail of laser fire erupted from hidden turrets. They crouched behind a bulkhead as molten holes sizzled in the metal around them. "Even!" Jacob panted. Draco's reptilian eyes flashed, but he nodded. Avoiding security systems, they made their way to the control room. A few keystrokes and Jacob accessed the ship logs. His blood ran cold. This isn't a Sakari ship. It's from a civilization called the Progenitors. They were wiped out by some kind of super plague. Draco snarled. If that virus is still here and it spreads to the Sakari worlds or human colonies... A deep rumble shook the ship. Outside, dropships full of space marines and Sakari warriors descended, weapons ready. They had tracked their commander's life signs, and it looked like bitter enemies had joined forces. The ultimate betrayal. Jacob and Draco locked eyes. They had to convince their trigger-happy reinforcements of the real threat, because if that plague escaped containment, it wouldn't just be humans and Sakari at each other's throats. It would be a fight for the very survival of their species. As they emerged from the derelict ship, Jacob and Draco found themselves facing a wall of weapons. Space Marines on one side, Sakari warriors on the other. Both sides looked ready to unleash hell at the slightest provocation. Jacob stepped forward, hands raised. "Stand down, we've uncovered a threat that endangers us all. This isn't the time for—" "Lies!" A Sakari commander shoved his way to the front, his eyes blazing with hatred and ambition. "Draco has betrayed us, siding with the enemy. This threat is nothing more than a trick to weaken our resolve." Draco snarled, his claws flexing. "You dare question my loyalty, Zaxos? I should rip out your throat for such insolence." Zaxos sneered, raising his plasma rifle. "The only traitor here is you, Draco. Men, open fire. Kill the humans and their pet lizard." All hell broke loose. Plasma bolts and tracer rounds crisscrossed the ravine as the two armies engaged, the air filling with the stench of ozone and burnt flesh. Jacob and Draco dove for cover behind a boulder, barely avoiding the deadly crossfire. "We have to stop this," Jacob shouted over the din of battle. "If we don't contain that plague—" "I know," Draco snapped. "But first we need to deal with Zaxos. He's always been jealous of my position, waiting for a chance to seize power." Jacob's mind raced, analyzing the chaos of the battlefield. Then an idea formed. "I'll create a diversion, draw their fire. You circle around and take out Zaxos. Without him stirring up trouble, we might have a chance to make them see reason." Draco hesitated, then nodded. "Don't get yourself killed, human. I still owe you a proper rematch." Jacob grinned, priming a smoke grenade. "Likewise, Lizard, now let's do this." He burst from cover, hurling the grenade into the center of the Sakari formation. As the smoke billowed, he charged forward, firing short, controlled bursts that sent the Sakari diving for cover. The Space Marines, seeing their sergeant in action, rallied and pressed the attack. Draco used the distraction to slip around the edge of the battle, his chameleonic scales blending with the jungle foliage. He spotted Zaxos directing his troops from a rocky outcropping, too focused on the battle to notice the danger approaching. With a roar, Draco lunged, tackling Zaxos to the ground. They rolled across the dirt, clawing and pummeling each other in a brutal hand-to-hand brawl. Zaxos was strong, but Draco's fury gave him the edge. A final, crushing blow to the skull, and Zaxos went limp. Draco rose, bloodied but victorious. "Sakari, stand down. The human speaks truth. There is a greater threat here, one that could doom us all." Slowly, grudgingly, the Sakari lowered their weapons. The Space Marines followed suit, looking to Jacob for guidance. He nodded, lowering his rifle. With the immediate crisis averted, Jacob and Draco led their troops into the progenitor ship, revealing the evidence of the long-dead civilization and the plague that had wiped them out. But even faced with the incontrovertible proof, the Sakari High Command balked at the idea of an alliance. "You expect us to trust humans after centuries of war?" The Overlord sneered, his holographic image flickering. "We will not be cowed by ghost stories and fabricated threats. Draco, you will return to the front lines immediately and crush the human incursion. Fail, and you will be branded a traitor to the Sakari race." The transmission cut out, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Jacob turned to Draco, seeing the conflict raging behind his reptilian eyes. The fate of both their species hung in the balance, and the clock was ticking. If they couldn't find a way to work together, to convince their leaders of the true danger, then it wouldn't matter who won the war. In the end, there would be no one left to claim victory. Draco's jaw clenched as he stared at the now blank view screen. The weight of the Overlord's ultimatum pressed down on him like a physical force. Return to the front lines and annihilate the humans, or be forever branded a traitor to his kind. But the evidence of the progenitor plague could not be ignored. If it escaped containment, the destruction it would wreak on both their species would dwarf their current conflict. He turned to Jacob, reptilian eyes hardening with resolve. "I'll defy my orders. We will stop this plague together or die trying." Jacob nodded grimly. "Then we need a ship and supplies fast before your buddies realize you've gone rogue and come after us." Moving swiftly, they raided the Sakari encampment, commandeering a scout ship. As Jacob fired up the engines, Draco input coordinates into the nav computer, tracing residual radiation signatures to the plague's potential origin point. The proximity alarm shrieked. An unidentified craft dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path, weapons already charging. "Evasive maneuvers," Draco barked, talons flying across the control console. Jacob wrenched the ship into a gut-churning spiral. Seconds later, searing plasma scorched past their hull. The hostile ship matched their every move, clinging to their tail like a rabid dog. Draco snarled in frustration. "It's a Zorak marauder, notorious pirates. They won't stop until they tear us apart for scrap." Looping the scout ship around, he aimed straight for the pirate vessel, accelerating to ramming speed. At the last second, He cut power to the engines and fired lateral thrusters, flipping them 180 degrees. The inertia carried them past the Marauder and directly into the seething maw of an unstable wormhole. Spatial distortions crackled across the view screen as the anomaly swallowed them whole. Then, as abruptly as it began, the wild ride ended. The ship shot out the other side of the wormhole, trailing wisps of exotic radiation, and found themselves face to face with a massive, derelict space station. Ancient and alien, it hung silent against a backdrop of unfamiliar stars. Draco ran a scan, his eyes widening at the results. The plague's radiological signature. It's coming from inside that station. We found the source. Jacob brought the ship in slowly, searching for a docking bay. The station's hull was pitted and scarred, ravaged by untold eons. A yawning airlock loomed ahead, dark and uninviting. The ship set down with a jolt. Equipping their weapons, Jacob and Draco stepped into the airlock, sealing their suits against the unknown atmosphere. The inner doors groaned open, revealing a dim, debris-strewn corridor. The air was stale, tinged with an acrid scent. Draco consulted his scanner. This way, the central lab is several levels down. As they ventured deeper into the eerie station, the only sound was their own muffled breathing and the crunch of shattered deck plates beneath their boots. Shadows pressed in from all sides, hiding untold dangers. Suddenly, a flicker of movement. Jacob reacted on instinct, shoving Draco aside as a searing plasma bolt sliced through the space he'd just occupied. The station's defense turrets swiveled to track them, servos whining with age and disrepair, but still very much lethal. They dove for cover, barely evading the hail of superheated plasma. Draco yanked open a wall panel, his talons a blur as he ripped out wires and circuit boards. Seconds later, the turrets sparked and went still. Jacob blew out a breath. Nice work, looks like this place still has some teeth. Draco grunted, already moving ahead. The progenitors built things to last, we need to be cautious. They forged on, descending level by decaying level. The air grew thicker, harder to filter. An oily sheen coated every surface, glinting in their lights. At last they reached the central lab. Draco powered up a console, the holographic display sputtering to life. He scanned through reams of data, his brow furrowed in concentration. Jacob stood guard, pulse rifle at the ready. An uneasy feeling prickled up his spine. They weren't alone. His instincts screamed a warning. He spun, dropping to one knee as a barrage of high-energy beams sizzled through the air above him. Black armored figures poured into the lab, the red sigil of Sakari Black Ops emblazoned on their chest plates. "Draco!" Jacob fired controlled bursts, downing 2 operatives in a spray of sparks and fluid. "We've got company!" Draco snarled, talons flying as he downloaded the critical data. Plasma fire stitched the console, nearly taking his head off. Snatching the data core, he rolled to his feet. "I have what we need, now we get out of here." Bullets and plasma bolts crisscrossed the lab, burning acrid holes in metal and flesh. Jacob and Draco fought back to back, a human and a Sakari united against a common foe. They blasted their way out of the lab, sprinting for the upper levels as the Black Ops team closed in. The ancient station shuddered around them, groaning under the onslaught. Bulkheads buckled, spilling clouds of debris. Flames licked hungrily at their heels. At last their ship came into view. Pulse pounding, lungs searing, they hurled themselves through the airlock. Jacob slapped the controls, engines flaring to life. The ship leapt forward, narrowly evading the grasping tendrils of the station's docking clamps. Plasma fire peppered their shields as the Black Ops ship pursued, determined to run them down. Jacob jinked and juked, pushing the ship to its limits. Draco manned the weapons, returning fire with grim determination. The derelict station receded behind them, explosions blossoming across its hull as the battle took its toll. The secrets it held could spell salvation or doom for their species. And those secrets now resided in the data core clutched in Draco's talons, the key to the progenitor plague, and perhaps to ending the war that had consumed them for so long. But first, they had to survive. Gritting his teeth, Jacob pointed the ship's nose toward the infinite stars and gunned the throttle, leaving the station and their pursuers far behind. The hunt was on. Jacob's heart pounded as he raced through the derelict station's corridors, the echoes of his pursuers' footsteps ringing in his ears. He ducked into a side passage, pressing his back against the cold metal wall. The Black Ops team was hot on his heels, their advanced tracking equipment making it nearly impossible to shake them. But Jacob had a few tricks up his sleeve. He pulled a small device from his belt and tossed it down the main corridor. Seconds later, a holographic image of Jacob flickered to life, running in the opposite direction. The sound of the Black Ops team's heavy boots faded as they chased after the decoy. With a grim smile, Jacob slipped away, weaving through the maze-like halls toward the rendezvous point. In another part of the station, Draco's claws flew across the ancient progenitor console, his eyes darting back and forth as he decrypted the alien language. Line by line, the shocking truth revealed itself. The plague that had wiped out the progenitors was no accident. It was a bioweapon created by a rogue faction to seize power. Draco slammed his fist against the console, a snarl of rage escaping his lips. The progenitors' hubris had nearly doomed their entire species, and now that same threat loomed over the Sakari and humans. He downloaded the data onto a portable drive and raced toward the rendezvous point, his heart pounding with a newfound urgency. But when he arrived at the designated coordinates, he found a scene of carnage. Jacob lay slumped against a wall, his armor scorched and blood seeping from a dozen wounds. The Black Ops team had him surrounded, their weapons trained on his battered form. Draco let out a roar of fury and charged forward, his plasma rifle spitting searing bolts of energy. He moved with blinding speed, his enhanced reflexes and strength making him more than a match for the Sakari operatives. One by one they fell before his onslaught, their armor crumpling under the force of his blows. Draco fought with a savage grace, his every movement precise and deadly. In moments the Black Ops team lay defeated, their broken bodies littering the ground. Draco knelt beside Jacob, quickly assessing his injuries. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice gruff with concern. As they blasted away from the station, Draco input the coordinates for the nearest human outpost. They had to warn the United Earth Command of the danger, to share the terrible knowledge they had uncovered. But when they arrived at the outpost, they were met with raised weapons and hostile glares. The human soldiers aimed their rifles at Draco, their eyes wide with fear and hatred. "Surrender the Sakari, Sergeant," the outpost commander ordered, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You're under arrest for treason." Jacob opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, a familiar figure pushed through the crowd. Colonel Hawkins, Jacob's commanding officer, leveled a cold stare at his subordinate. "Stand down, Sergeant," he barked. "You've been colluding with the enemy. The Sakari High Command and I have been in talks, working to end this war through diplomacy. Your actions threaten to undermine everything." Jacob's blood ran cold. His own commanding officer working with the Sakari, it was unthinkable. He glanced at Draco, seeing the same shock and betrayal reflected in the alien's eyes. They had risked everything to uncover the truth, to save both their species from annihilation. But now, facing the barrels of their own comrades' guns, they realized the true extent of the conspiracy they were up against. The war, the plague, the uneasy alliance between the Sakari and human leadership, it was all connected. And if they couldn't find a way to expose the truth, to break the cycle of hatred and deception, then everything they had fought for would be for nothing. Jacob's teeth gritted as the cold metal of the restraints bit into his wrists. He glared daggers at Colonel Hawkins, the man he had once trusted with his life, now revealed as a traitor to their species. Draco snarled beside him, his reptilian muscles straining against the bonds. Hawkins paced before them, a smug grin on his face. "You should have joined me, Sergeant. Together we could have brought the Sakari to their knees and ensured humanity's supremacy." "You're insane," Jacob spat. "That bioweapon will kill indiscriminately. Millions will die." Acceptable losses, Hawkins shrugged. The ends justify the means. As the colonel droned on about his twisted vision, Jacob's fingers worked frantically at his wristcom, activating a distress beacon. He prayed his squad would receive the signal in time. Guards hauled them to their feet, dragging them towards a holding cell. Jacob caught Draco's eye, a silent understanding passing between them. They had to escape, to stop Hawkins before it was too late. The cell door clanged shut, leaving them in darkness. Draco's claws made short work of their restraints. "What now?" he growled. Jacob's mind raced. "We need a ship, something fast and stealthy." His eyes widened. "The prototype fighter in the hangar bay." Draco grinned, baring razor-sharp teeth. "I like the way you think, human." They made their move during the guard rotation, Jacob's honed combat skills, and Draco's raw strength overpowering their surprised captors. Alarms blared as they raced through the corridors, ducking plasma fire from the security turrets. The hangar bay doors loomed ahead. Jacob's palm slammed against the access panel, his override codes granting them entry. The sleek lines of the prototype fighter gleamed under the harsh lights. Jacob slid into the pilot's seat, fingers flying across the unfamiliar controls. The engines roared to life, the craft lifting off the deck as Draco manned the weapons station. Plasma bolts streaked past the canopy as they rocketed out of the hangar, leaving chaos in their wake. The stars blurred into streaks of light as they pushed the fighter to its limits, but their escape had not gone unnoticed. A proximity alert flashed across the display, a squad of human fighters closing fast. Jacob's heart leapt as he recognized the lead ship's transponder code. "It's my team, they got my signal." Hailing frequencies crackled to life. "Sarge, what the hell is going on?" his second-in-command demanded. "Why are you with that Sakari?" "Hawkins has lost it," Jacob explained quickly. "He's going to unleash a bioweapon on the Sakari, start a genocide. We have to stop him." There was a tense pause, a crackle of static over the comm. "I know it sounds crazy, but I need you to trust me. Trust us." Another pause, then a gruff chuckle. "Just like old times, eh, Sarge? We've got your back." Jacob felt a surge of pride for his squad's loyalty. "Form up and stay tight, we're going in hot." As the Sakari homeworld loomed in the viewscreen, a massive fleet of warships filled the void, an impenetrable wall of metal and guns. "We'll never punch through that," Draco hissed. Jacob's eyes narrowed. "We won't have to." Activating the comm, he hailed the Sakari flagship. "This is Sergeant Jacob Jones of the United Earth Marines. I have urgent news for the Emperor. We must speak with him immediately." There was a long, tense silence. Then a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the speaker. "This is Emperor Azor of the Sakari Empire. Speak quickly, human, before I have your ship obliterated for this impudence." Draco stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "Father, it is I, Draco. We come bearing grave tidings. A human traitor plans to unleash a devastating bioweapon upon our people. You must grant us an audience." Another silence heavy with shock. "My son, you are alive?" The Emperor's voice was thick with emotion. "Very well. You may dock with the flagship, but be warned, if this is a trick, you will pay with your lives." As the fighter slipped through the Sakari defenses, guided by Draco's command codes, Jacob felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. The fighter settled onto the flagship's hangar deck with a hiss of hydraulics. Jacob and Draco strode down the ramp, flanked by the Emperor's elite guard. Azor himself awaited them, regal and imposing in his ornate armor. "Speak," he rumbled, his eyes fixed on his son, "and pray your words are true." Draco bowed his head. "Father, I have seen the horrors of this ancient plague with my own eyes. The humans, some of them seek to use it as a weapon against us. We must act quickly to stop them." Jacob met the Emperor's eyes unflinchingly. "Because, Your Majesty, I have seen the same horrors. I have fought alongside your son and learned that we are not so different. We both seek to protect our people. And right now, the greatest threat to both our species comes from within my own ranks." The Emperor took the drive, his claws curling around it. For a long moment he was silent, the weight of centuries of war and bloodshed hanging in the air. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well. We will review this evidence, and if what you say is true, then perhaps it is time for a new era. An era of cooperation rather than conflict." As the Emperor strode from the hangar, Draco turned to Jacob, a fierce light in his eyes. "We're not done yet, human. Hawkins is still out there, and he won't go down without a fight." Jacob nodded grimly. "Then let's bring the fight to him, together." Side by side, the human soldier and the Sakari prince headed for the war room, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in centuries, the future held a glimmer of hope, a hope for peace, forged in the fires of war by two unlikely allies. Jacob's heart pounded as he crept through the opulent corridors of the Sakari palace, his squad close behind. Draco led the way, his intimate knowledge of the palace's layout guiding them past unsuspecting guards and through hidden passages. Their disguises, meticulously crafted to mimic the Emperor's personal guard, allowed them to move undetected. As they approached the massive doors of the throne room, the muffled sounds of a heated argument reached their ears. Draco held up a clawed hand, signaling for silence. He pressed his ear to the door, his eyes widening as he listened. "Hawkins is already inside," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "He's demanding my father's surrender." Jacob's grip tightened on his pulse rifle. "Then we don't have much time. We need to get in there now." With a curt nod, Draco pushed open the doors, revealing a scene of tense confrontation. Colonel Hawkins stood before the Emperor, flanked by a group of heavily armed mercenaries. Their weapons were trained on the Sakari leader, who sat defiantly upon his throne. "You have one last chance, Emperor," Hawkins snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "Surrender your empire to human rule, or face the consequences." As the standoff escalated, Jacob and Draco stepped forward, shedding their disguises. Hawkins spun to face them, his expression twisting with rage and surprise. Jacob leveled his pulse rifle at the colonel. "We're here to stop you, Hawkins. We know about your plan to use the progenitor bioweapon." Draco stepped forward, his eyes locked on his father. "Emperor, please listen to us. Hawkins has betrayed us all. He seeks to unleash a plague that will devastate our people and the humans alike." The Emperor's gaze shifted between his son and the colonel, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Jacob seized the moment, tossing a data drive at the Emperor's feet. "The proof is all there, Your Majesty. Hawkins has been manipulating both our species, prolonging the war for his own gain." He raised his plasma rifle, aiming it squarely at the Emperor's chest. In that instant, the throne room erupted into chaos. Jacob and his squad opened fire, their pulse rounds tearing into the mercenaries. Draco leapt forward, his claws slashing through armor and flesh as he fought to reach his father's side. The Sakari guards, spurred into action by the sudden violence, joined the fray. Plasma bolts and tracer rounds crisscrossed the room, scorching the ornate walls and shattering priceless artifacts. Amidst the chaos, Hawkins broke free, dashing towards a hidden panel in the wall. With a snarl of triumph, he slammed his fist against it, revealing a concealed passageway. "Hawkins is getting away," Jacob shouted, dodging a hail of plasma fire. "Draco, with me! We have to stop him!" The two warriors raced after the colonel, plunging into the dark tunnel. They emerged in a hidden hangar just in time to see Hawkins boarding a sleek black fighter craft. Jacob leapt into the cockpit beside him, strapping himself in as Draco fired up the engines. With a scream of thrusters, they blasted out of the hangar, hot on Hawkins' tail. The aerial dogfight that followed was unlike anything Jacob had ever experienced. They wove through the towering spires of the Sakari capital, trading blistering volleys of plasma fire. Hawkins was a skilled pilot, his craft dancing and twisting with incredible agility. But Draco was better. Born to the skies, he flew with an instinctive grace, anticipating Hawkins' every move. Slowly, inexorably, they closed the gap. As they neared the city's outskirts, Hawkins's craft suddenly banked hard, diving towards a heavily fortified compound. Jacob's heart seized as he realized what lay within. The bioweapon, he breathed, his voice tight with fear. Draco, we have to take him out now. Draco nodded grimly, pushing the interceptor to its limits. They screamed towards Hawkins' ship, weapons primed and ready. The interceptor shuddered as Draco pushed the engines to their limits, the towering spires of the Sakari capital blurring past. Jacob leaned out the side, pulse rifle spitting deadly bursts at Hawkins' ship. The traitor colonel wove through the urban canyons with uncanny skill, plasma bolts searing the air inches from the canopy. He's heading for the industrial sector, Draco snarled, banking hard to follow. If he reaches the factories, we'll never catch him in that maze. He targeted Hawkins' engines and fired, the high-powered shots ripping through metal. Smoke poured from the stricken vessel as it lurched drunkenly, losing altitude. Draco dived after it, matching its descent. The two ships plummeted, trading fire, locked in a deadly dance. At the last moment, Hawkins pulled up, skidding across a landing platform in a shower of sparks. Draco set down hard, the interceptor's landing gear shrieking in protest. Jacob was out and running before the engines died, Draco close on his heels. Ahead, Hawkins staggered from his ruined ship, his face twisted with rage. He ripped away his tattered uniform, revealing the gleaming cybernetics beneath. "You fools," he spat, his voice distorted by mechanical undertones. "You think you can stop me? I'm the future of warfare, the perfect fusion of man and machine." He charged, moving with inhuman speed. Jacob barely had time to brace before the impact sent him flying. He hit the ground hard, rolling to absorb the force. Draco leapt to his defense, his claws screeching against Hawkins' metal chassis. They traded blows in a brutal melee, fists and talons against reinforced steel. Hawkins was fast and unimaginably strong, his mechanical limbs fueled by advanced servos. But Jacob and Draco fought with the desperate fury of those with everything to lose. Jacob ducked a punch that would have taken his head off, countering with a rifle butt to Hawkins' midsection. The colonel staggered, and Draco pressed the advantage, raking his claws across Hawkins' faceplate. Sparks flew as metal tore, but Hawkins rallied, seizing Draco by the throat. The Sakari prince choked, scrabbling at the unyielding grip. Jacob leapt onto Hawkins' back, locking his arm around the colonel's neck. Hawkins roared, slamming backwards, crushing Jacob against a bulkhead. Pain lanced through his body, but he held on grimly, tightening his chokehold. Draco dropped to one knee, gasping for breath, then surged upward, something metallic glinting in his hand. The EMP grenade detonated in a blinding flash, washing over Hawkins in a tide of crackling energy. The colonel convulsed, his cybernetic limbs jerking spasmodically. His grip loosened, and Jacob hurled him away, sending him crashing to the deck. Hawkins twitched and spasmed, his systems overloading. Jacob snatched up his rifle, aiming it squarely at the fallen colonel's head. "It's over, Hawkins." The colonel glared up at him, hatred burning in his eyes. "You think this is the end? You have no idea what's coming, what I've set in motion." Sakari and human dropships circled overhead, disgorging heavily armed troops. They formed a perimeter, weapons trained on the downed cyborg. Draco stepped forward, the bioweapon canister secure in his grasp. As the Emperor and Earth Command leaders strode onto the platform, Jacob and Draco presented their captive and his deadly cargo. For a long moment, the two sides eyed each other warily, centuries of bitter conflict warring with the undeniable evidence of Hawkins' betrayal. Then slowly the Emperor extended his hand. The human commander hesitated, then clasped it firmly. A ripple of murmurs spread through the assembled soldiers, a truce, hard-won and tenuous, but a truce nonetheless. The moment was shattered by a sudden piercing alarm from the bioweapon canister. Draco studied the readouts, his eyes widening in horror. "They fail-safe," he shouted. "Hawkins must have triggered it remotely. It's set to release the plague on multiple worlds, including Earth and the Sakari homeworld." Jacob cursed, his mind racing. They had minutes, maybe less, before the failsafe activated, and billions died. He locked eyes with Draco, seeing the same grim resolve mirrored there. "We have to stop it," Jacob said, "whatever it takes." As one, they turned to their leaders, voices raised in urgent appeal. The fate of worlds hung in the balance. The newly forged alliance faced its first true test. The fail-safe timer counting down, Jacob and Draco assembled their strike team with blinding speed. The best of the best from human and Sakari forces, united in purpose. They boarded a sleek stealth ship, the Nighthawk, its hull a dull black that swallowed light. Draco's claws danced across the nav console, inputting the coordinates for the uncharted world. The planet where progenitor secrets slumbered, the ship's engines thrummed with power as it knifed through the void. As they descended through roiling storm clouds, a forbidding landscape revealed itself. Jagged obsidian spires stabbed toward a sickly green sky. Geysers of noxious gas erupted from fissures in the planet's sickly yellow crust. The Nighthawk set down on an obsidian plain, the team disembarking with weapons primed. In the distance, the angular silhouette of a vast structure rose from the toxic landscape, the progenitor research facility. They approached cautiously, scanners probing for threats. The towering blast doors were pitted and scarred, but still intact. Draco interfaced with the control panel, his knowledge of progenitor systems making short work of the ancient encryption. With a groan of long-unused mechanisms, the doors ground open. Stale air gusted from the gaping maw of the entrance, carrying with it an unsettling scent of decay. Activating helmet lights, Jacob took point, pulse rifle at the ready. They advanced into a cavernous foyer, the beams of light skittering across banks of dusty consoles and desiccated remains of long-dead progenitors. A sudden buzzing filled the air. Insectoid drones, each the size of a man's fist, detached from alcoves in the walls. Proximity sensors. The drones swarmed the team, metallic pincers snapping. Jacob and Draco reacted instantly, their weapons spitting plasma. The stench of burnt chitin filled the air as smoking drone carcasses clattered to the floor. But more drones boiled out from the depths of the facility, a relentless tide of metal. "We need to find the central control room," Draco shouted over the din of battle. He consulted his wrist scanner, overlaying the schematics of progenitor facilities. "This way!" They fought their way deeper into the labyrinthine complex, the drones harrying them at every turn. Poison darts shattered against their armor, the neurotoxins sizzling and smoking. At last they reached the control room, a circular chamber dominated by a holographic display. But as they approached, hidden turrets emerged from the walls, humming with building charge. Jacob tackled Draco aside, as searing lances of plasma scorched the air where they'd stood a heartbeat before. They rolled to their feet, returning fire. The turrets exploded in gouts of flame and shrapnel. Smoke curled from ruptured power conduits as Jacob and Draco charged into the control room, making for the central console. Draco's claws flew over the incandescent runes, decrypting the ancient security protocols. The hologram flickered and danced, resolving into a star map. A pulsing red icon marked a distant world. "The source of the progenitor bioweapon," Draco growled. "We must—" A thunderous explosion rocked the chamber. The far wall collapsed inward, crushing consoles and equipment. Through the smoke and dust, figures emerged. Sakari warriors, their armor the deep crimson of spilled blood. At their head strode a towering figure in ornate battle plate, a cruel smile twisting his scaled features. "Warlord Kazon," Draco snarled, recognition and hatred warring in his eyes. "You treacherous filth." Kazon laughed, a rasping, hissing sound. "Ah, the young prince so far from home." His gaze fell on Jacob, calculating. "And the human who would be an ally. How touching." "Surrender, Kazon," Jacob called out, his voice hard as steel. "You're outnumbered and outmatched." Kazon's smile only widened. More Sakari insurgents poured through the breach, weapons leveled at Jacob's team. "I think not, human. The power of the progenitors will soon be mine, and with it, the Sakari throne." He raised his fist, a small capsule clutched in his talons. A sample of the bioweapon pulsing with sickly light. The choice is yours, Prince Draco. Join me and rule at my side, or perish with your human pets. Draco's eyes narrowed, his stance shifting subtly. Jacob tensed, reading the coiled tension in his ally's frame. A heartbeat of silence stretched between them, 1,000 unspoken words in a single glance. Then as one they moved. Draco lunged at Kazon with a roar of challenge, his blade a blinding arc. Jacob and his squad opened fire, plasma bolts stitching a deadly line through the insurgent ranks. The battle was joined, a hurricane of steel and blood and plasma. Jacob and Draco fought back to back, their movements perfectly synchronized. Where one blocked, the other struck. Where one faltered, the other pressed the advantage. But Kazan's insurgents were well-trained and fanatically loyal. For everyone that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. Jacob's team was being pushed back, slowly but inexorably. Jacob gritted his teeth, slamming a fresh power cell into his rifle. They couldn't hold out much longer. They needed a new plan, and fast. His gaze fell on the shattered wall, the twisted metal struts jutting like broken ribs. A desperate idea kindled in his mind. "Draco," he shouted over the calm, "the breach, we need to bring the roof down on them." Draco's eyes widened in understanding. With a snarl of effort, he disengaged from Kazon, leaving the warlord staggered and bleeding. They sprinted for the breach, Jacob placing breaching charges on the support struts as they went. Kazon's bellows of rage echoed behind them. They dove through the jagged opening, rolling to their feet in the toxic twilight. Jacob thumbed the detonator. The world erupted in thunder and fire. The charges blew, the support struts shattering. With a rumbling groan, the roof collapsed, burying the control room and the insurgents within under tons of rubble. In the sudden ringing silence, Jacob and Draco stared at each other, chests heaving. Dust and blood streaked their armor, but they were alive. Kazon's fist punched through the debris, the bioweapon canister still clutched in his talons. He dragged himself from the rubble, his armor dented and scorched, but his eyes blazing with madness and hate. "Fools," he rasped. "You only delay the inevitable. The Sakari Empire will be mine." He raised the canister high, thumb hovering over the activation stud. Jacob and Draco tensed, weapons rising. A lance of searing blue light speared down from the sky, vaporizing Kazon where he stood. The canister tumbled from his disintegrating grasp, clattering to the rubble. Jacob and Draco spun, eyes widening at the sight of a massive progenitor warship descending through the clouds, ancient weapons glowing with eldritch light. A voice boomed from the ship's external speakers, a voice that resonated in their bones and sent icicles down their spines. "You have trespassed on our world. You have tampered with forces beyond your comprehension." The ancient progenitor warship loomed overhead, its eldritch energies crackling through the toxic atmosphere. Jacob and Draco exchanged a look of dread, the implications of the ship's presence sinking in. They had unwittingly stumbled into the domain of a power far beyond their understanding. But there was no time to dwell on this revelation. The warship's weapons glowed ominously, preparing to unleash destruction upon the planet's surface. They had to act fast. "Inside now," Jacob barked, sprinting for the entrance of the research facility. Draco followed close behind, his claws leaving deep gouges in the obsidian rock. They raced through the twisting corridors, navigating by the flickering light of emergency beacons. The facility shuddered under the impact of the warship's opening salvo, ancient metal groaning in protest. Suddenly, a hulking figure emerged from the shadows ahead. It was the warlord, his crimson armor splattered with the blood of Jacob and Draco's fallen comrades. His eyes gleamed with malice and triumph. "You're too late," he snarled, hefting a pulsing canister that could only be the bioweapon. "With this power, I will bring the Sakari Empire to its knees." Jacob didn't waste breath on a reply. He charged forward, a wordless battle cry torn from his throat. The warlord met him head-on, the bioweapon canister discarded as they crashed together in a whirlwind of strikes and counter-strikes. Draco leapt past the grappling figures, snatching up the canister. He had to find a way to neutralize it before the warlord's forces could reclaim it, or worse, before the progenitor warship decided to eradicate the threat entirely. A hail of plasma fire forced him into cover. The warlord's elite guard had caught up, their weapons spitting deadly streams of incandescent energy. Draco returned fire, his own rifle bucking against his shoulder. He risked a glance back at Jacob, still locked in mortal combat with the warlord. The human fought with a savage intensity, his armor dented and scorched, his face a mask of blood and sweat. But the warlord matched him blow for blow, augmented by cruel cybernetics and driven by a fanatic's zeal. Draco knew he had to end this, and fast. The containment of the bioweapon wouldn't last long under this onslaught, if it ruptured. Inside he found a nightmarish tangle of progenitor machinery pulsing with malevolent energy. At its heart, a stasis field hummed, awaiting the bioweapon canister. Draco hesitated, his gaze drawn to a flickering console nearby. The display showed the progressing battle outside, Jacob still fighting furiously against the warlord, the human's strength flagging with each passing moment. With a growl of frustration, Draco slammed the canister into the stasis field. The machinery thrummed, ancient protocols engaging to analyze and dismantle the bioweapon. But the process was agonizingly slow, precious seconds ticking by as Jacob fought for his life. Draco turned to the console, his claws flying over the controls. There had to be something he could do, some way to even the odds, and then he saw it, an option to overload the facility's power core. The resulting blast would vaporize the bioweapon and everything else within a kilometer radius, including Jacob and the warlord. Draco's hand hovered over the control, indecision tearing at him. The mission or his friend, duty or loyalty? A strangled cry of pain over the comm decided for him. Jacob had fallen, the warlord's blade buried in his chest. With a roar of anguish and fury, Draco slammed his fist down on the console. Warning klaxons blared, the facility trembling as the power core began its irreversible overload. He turned and sprinted for the door for Jacob, a desperate plan forming in his mind. He had mere seconds before the core detonated, but perhaps, if he could reach his fallen comrade, if he could drag him clear. It was a fool's hope, and Draco knew it, but he had to try. He owed Jacob that much. He burst from the lab, plasma rifles forgotten, hurtling towards the site of the duel. The warlord stood over Jacob's broken body, his blade raised for the killing blow. Draco slammed into the warlord with bone-crushing force, sending them both tumbling. They rolled across the shattered obsidian, grappling and tearing at each other with a savagery born of desperation. In the end, it was Draco who emerged victorious, his claws wrapped around the warlord's throat, choking the life from him. But there was no time to savor the triumph. The power core reached critical mass, a blinding white radiance engulfing the facility. Draco hurled himself towards Jacob, shielding the human with his own body, as the world dissolved into searing light and unimaginable heat. And then oblivion. Consciousness returned slowly, painfully. Draco found himself lying amid the smoking ruins of the facility, the twisted remains of the warlord a few meters away. The progenitor warship was gone, the skies clear of its menacing presence. Jacob! Draco's voice was a raw whisper, choked with emotions he couldn't name. You did it, Jacob rasped, each word an effort. The weapon? Destroyed, along with the facility and the warlord. Jacob nodded, a faint smile touching his bloodied lips. Good. His eyes started to drift closed, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Draco clutched him tighter, panic seizing his heart. No, Jacob, stay with me. We'll get you help, But even as he said the words, he knew it was too late. Jacob's injuries were too severe, the damage too extensive. Even if help was coming, even if a medical frigate was already descending through the atmosphere, it wouldn't be enough. Jacob knew it too. With a titanic effort, he raised a hand, gripping Draco's arm with fading strength. Draco, promise you'll find a way to end this war, to bring our people together, please. Draco nodded, vision blurring with unshed tears. I promise, Jacob, I swear it, on my life, on my honor. Your sacrifice will not be in vain." His eyes slipped closed, his hand falling away. His chest stilled, the light fading from his face. And Draco howled his anguish to the uncaring stars, cradling the body of his friend, his brother, as the smoke of 100 battles swirled around them. Draco knelt there amid the ruins, heedless of the approaching ships, of the shouts of human and Sakari soldiers. He knelt, and he wept, and he made a silent vow. He would keep his promise to Jacob. No matter how long it took, no matter what challenges he faced, he would find a way to end this war, to forge a lasting peace between their people. For Jacob, for the future, for the hope of a galaxy where the sacrifice of heroes was no longer needed. He rose to his feet, Jacob's body held close. Squaring his shoulders, he turned to face the arriving soldiers, the first step on a long and difficult road. But he would walk it, for the sake of his friend and for the sake of all those who would come after. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps in time it could be better. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.